Hello. This must be about the 5th or the 6th time I've tried to make a video about this situation here. Nicola Sturgeon talking at a zero tolerance event in Edinburgh. This zero tolerance event is to do with preventing violence against women, specifically violence by men against women, and subjects such as domestic violence will be a major aspect of that. Now, why have I had trouble dealing with this? And I've started this video so many times. There probably there may be 20 minutes worth of rubbish at the beginning of this video that I'll have to cut out before I started again and actually got somewhere. And the reason is because the whole situation is so replete with surrealistic irony, it's a bit difficult to know where to start. You see, guests were asked to refrain from discussions of the definition of a woman and single-sex spaces. So at the same time as they're having a zero tolerance event in Edinburgh about violence against women, they are telling people, whatever you do, don't talk about what a woman is. Don't talk about the violence some men will go to any lengths to pursue violence against women, including identifying themselves as women so they can gain access to what should be female-only spaces. It's a bit like a group of engineers discussing how to build a bridge without being allowed to discuss what the subsoil is like. So you've got all this airy-fairy bridge with all the, whatever, reinforced concrete and galvanized steel and weighting loads and everything, and you don't know what you're building the bridge on. And that's basically what is going on here. You can discuss non-violence against women all you want, but if you're not going to define what the women are, then you're talking hot air. You're just talking about nothing. And by the way, if you can hear a weird noise going on at the side, it's the dog snoring. I should be careful not to get too heated, shouldn't I? Or he'll wake up and try to comfort me, I suppose. So, despite the guests being asked to be nice, polite girls and not mention the definition of a woman, one of them did decide to speak up. It's the latest act of protest against Miss Sturgeon's controversial plans to allow Scots to self-identify their legal gender. The unidentified heckler said, "Shame on you. You've fomented this culture in Scotland that basically tells women they are bigoted for standing up for women's rights. I see you, and thousands of women around Scotland see you." But, I have spent a lot of time puzzling this over. And the only explanation I could come up with, I mean, Sturgeon's party are coming up with a policy that is going to be hugely unpopular. A policy that's going to put Scottish women at a great disadvantage and also put them in danger. And you wonder why Sturgeon is doing that if she wants people to continue to support the SNP. In fact, to continue to support the SNP's drive for independence. And the only answer I could come up with, and my apologies, I know there are many Scots who watch this, and I'm sure some of them believe that Scotland could be an independent state, but I don't believe it can. I don't believe it has the population or the resources or even the links. And it never did. It was always a bit of an outlier. I mean, Britain was an outlier throughout world history. It's often been an outlier. England, rather, has been an outlier. Scotland is even more of an outlier. It has a very difficult climate for a start, and it's always had a low population, and it's always had a seepage of population towards England for better opportunities, because another thing about Scotland is a sort of a religion that developed there that, and I'm talking about the clan system and all the rest of it, the entire culture really, not just the religion, that strongly discouraged individualism, individuality, whatever it's called. And that's part of the Scottish temperament. And it actually worked well when it was in conjunction with England. Scottish engineers went all over the world and did very well out of the British Empire. And I don't think that Scotland can make it on quite well on its own, as it is. Looking at it absolutely baldly, it's a country that relies to a great extent on the Barnett formula, which is a funding formula that in which a lot of money is transferred from England to subsidise things in Scotland. And I have relatives in Scotland, and I know they get very annoyed when I mention this sort of thing, but I did notice that Scottish roads are wonderful. In London, the roads are total pants. And there are two reasons for this. The first is the Scots have more funds for their roads, and the second thing is there aren't so many people on the roads. And I want to remind you that I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. I also am on Twitter, Gab and Parler as @Granniopteryx, and let you know when I've uploaded a new video on Twitter, Gab or Parler @Granniopteryx. Right, you can help my channel by liking, by sharing and by subscribing. You can also help financially. Buy me a coffee or one of the links below. But liking is really important for the algorithm, so please do that. Okay, back to what I was saying. All right, well, yeah, that's that. So I've given you my opinion of why Scotland can't be independent. But I think that many Scots also feel that way. And Sturgeon is part of a movement to convince Scots that they can be independent, and that's a fantasy. And so it's, I don't say this is planned, but you have this fantasy of self-ID. If you start with that, you can continue with other fantasies. That's where I was going. So that's the only possible reason I can think of this behaviour, which is definitely not going to get them votes. So let's see what this woman has to say.
It doesn't matter. You are allowing paedophiles, sex offenders and rapists to self-ID in Scotland and put women at risk. And women campaigning for women's rights is not against trans people. I've received rape threats, death threats from males who self-ID as women. Women have been getting assaulted, and because they're standing up for women's rights. Shame on you! You fermented this culture in Scotland.
Okay, I you know, that's a whole 5 minutes. I'm not going to go through that. But yeah, it's sort of interesting here. There's a woman saying that women are being assaulted in women-only areas, including prisons, by the way, by men who have self-ID'd. Look at the faces of these frozen women here. That woman frozen in shock, isn't she? Look at her face. And that woman holding her hand over her mouth. None of them is turning round to look at this woman. None of them is showing any support for her. She's standing there alone. Why aren't these women showing her support? And you might say, it's the same question I asked when the women were standing next to Laia Thomas, who had taken first prize in some swimming competition. And they were standing there, not saying anything. I mean, they were showing, what they did was, the person who should have had third place, they invited her and they all stood together. But But they didn't do more than that. They didn't walk out, did they? And remember those girls who were, I'll find some photos. Remember those girls who were applauding that beauty queen who was a man, and not even a very attractive man. And they were, clapping like seals. Why are women doing this? And you get one woman standing up and she's not given any support from them. And, here she says, and those of you sitting here are complicit, keeping your mouths shut while women have actually been raped by males who have self-ID'd as women. Well, obviously not that much self-IDs. And then she says she supports trans rights. That's not what she's talking about. And after she'd finished, or was removed, Miss Sturgeon apologised to attendees following the outburst, but insisted she did not want to silence criticism. Why did she say that? Well, listen. She was standing there. There was one woman who could be dismissed as hysterical, while the others just sat there without saying anything. And what I'm saying is, shame on you, Scottish women. Shame on you. You should be... This is your party's policy. The Scottish National Party, whether you voted for them or not, they represent Scotland. And you're not showing any support for that woman talking about a serious social problem. So there was a note, it says here, sent to guests in advance of the event, telling them not to mention something like this. And most of them just thought, all right, yeah, we'll follow the leader. And what the Gender Recognition Reform Bill is set to remove the requirement for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria when seeking a gender recognition certificate. So any man can walk into wherever it is and declare himself a woman. No. Right. Well, yeah. So it's in its final stage and set to be enacted by Christmas. It aims to simplify the process by which a transgender person can switch gender through self-identification and lowers the age limit of gender reform from 18 to 16. This is a hideous law. It allows confused teenagers to access it. It allows men with a personal agenda. It's a misogynist agenda, a misogynistic agenda to access it. And as I said, I reckon it's part of the fantasy that Sturgeon is trying to create, a fantasy world where Scotland can be independent and people can say what sex they are. I think it's all part of the same thing. Right, well, comments below for anyone who disagrees with me about Scotland. I know I'm going to get a bit of flaming, perhaps even from my own relatives. Okay, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.